Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome back to our final episode of our Taming of the Shu series titled Liu Zhang's Surrender. So last time, we ended with a cliffhanger, as one man's arrival would sway the outcome of the siege of Chengdu, and that man's name would be Ma Chao, as Ma Chao had just joined forces with Liu Bei after his rebellion against Cao Cao turned south. And since our Ma Chao Rebellion series is going to be starting next week, we're not going to dive too deep into the details of Ma Chao's arrival, as all we need to know is that on the 10th day of starting the siege of Chengdu, Ma Chao would arrive in Liu Bei's camp. Then after a quick cleanup, Ma Chao, along with the new force given to him by Liu Bei, would make camp directly in front of the north gate of Chengdu to project fear into the city. Now, why would Ma Chao project fear? Well, first you have to know that from the moment that Zhang Song was executed and Liu Bei openly went to war against Liu Zhang, all northern routes ended up controlled by Liu Bei, as he would seize Baishui Gate. So for more than a year now, Liu Zhang and the rest of the Shu region have received no outside news. And the last time they heard about Ma Chao, he was leading the numerous western warlords in a coalition against Cao Cao. And in the first few exchanges, Ma Chao and the Xiliang army had actually won and even almost killed Cao Cao. But of course, Liu Zhang and the rest of the Yi province did not know that Ma Chao's coalition would eventually fall apart, nor did they know that by this time, when Ma Chao is joining Liu Bei, he had almost no forces under his name. All they knew is that Ma Chao represented the Qiang warlords capable of even resisting Cao Cao, and now somehow he is willingly working under Liu Bei, and even personally marched his forces to join in on the siege at Chengdu. And it also helps that Ma Chao had a reputation for massacring cities after winning the siege. So it's little surprise that when Ma Chao appeared, Liu Zhang changed his tune, as Jian Yong was soon welcomed into the city as Liu Bei's envoy to negotiate the terms of the surrender. Now Jian Yong has been with Liu Bei probably even longer than Guan Yu and Zhang Fei. It has always been in an advisory/secretary role for Liu Bei. And an interesting tad bit about Jian Yong is how he prefers to lie on his side when speaking with people, which is rather disrespectful in most instances, but most within Liu Bei's camp has gotten used to his quirk. But it is also said that even Jian Yong sits up straight when speaking to Zhuge Liang, out of respect, especially considering the troubles that Liu Bei had to go through to employ him in the first place. Now, when Liu Bei had first arrived in the Yi province during that 100-day feast where Liu Zhang welcomed them, Jian Yong and Liu Zhang hit it off, as Liu Zhang ended up quite fond of Jian Yong. Therefore, when the negotiation for surrender started, it was Jian Yong who traveled inside Chengdu alone to discuss terms with Liu Zhang. Fortunately, Liu Bei's terms are rather lenient, as Liu Zhang would not be harmed, and all his personal wealth would remain his, but he can no longer remain in the Yi province. Liu Bei would grant him a general title and move him to Gong'an in the Jin province, where he would live under the watchful eyes of Guan Yu for the rest of his life. Now, once again, there were those within Liu Zhang's court who supported continued resistance, as after all, they still had 30,000 troops within Chengdu, and ample supplies that would last for another year at least. But Liu Zhang, being the kind ruler that he was, replied that my father and I had been rulers of the Yi province for well over 20 years. We have been unable to bring much happiness to the citizens here, and now with this ongoing war in the last 3 years, families have lost sons and husbands, and many are displaced from their homes, all to protect me. Now this can finally all end, and I will no longer feel guilty for another soul. So with that, the gates of Chengdu opened, as Liu Zhang would ride out the city in the same carriage as Jian Yong, with the rest of his court trailing behind, to present Liu Bei the governor's seal of the Yi province. And as Liu Zhang rode onto the street of Chengdu, the citizens of Chengdu were all in tears as everyone acknowledged his kindness and benevolent rule. And after receiving Liu Zhang's surrender, Liu Bei is now the ruler of the Yi province, And as the ruler, there are many things for him to tackle. First, he had to reward his own troops for helping him secure the Yi province. Then he needed to integrate Liu Zhang's court as his own, as his rule of the Yi province required their support. And lastly, Liu Bei needs to actually rule the Yi province with implementation of laws and rules, as Liu Zhang's weak and kind approach led to a lax environment where the rule of law basically fell apart and fell into the hands of the dominant gentry clans within the Yi province. And with Liu Bei trying to turn the Yi province into his foundation for future wars against Cao Cao, there needs to be a fair economic system to support taxation. Land development and distribution needs to support conscription laws, and key resources like iron and salt needed central governance. So, starting off with rewarding his own generals, everyone pretty much got new titles and promotions, but 4 people received the highest honor from Liu Bei, and they would be Zhuge Liang, Fa Zheng, Zhang Fei, and Guan Yu, as they were each rewarded 500 jin of gold, 1,000 jin of silver, 50 million copper coins, and 1,000 yard of silk. Now, jin here is a unit weight measurement that roughly equate to 227 grams today. So the 500 jin of gold will come out roughly to about 113 kilos of gold today. And aside from these 4 generals that received the highest honors, people like Zhao Yun and Wei Yan both got new general titles as well. And aside from rewarding the living, Pang Tong was also buried at the Falling Phoenix Hill near Luocheng by Liu Bei. And his father would also receive honorary titles for his son's sacrifice and contribution. Do note that, unlike the romance portrayal, Pang Tong, who is nicknamed the Fledgling Phoenix, did not die at the Falling Phoenix Hill, but rather Liu Bei had him buried there, and his grave is actually still there today for those who might want to add it on their sightseeing tour list for the Chengdu area. Then for Liu Bei's regular troops, the treasury inside Chengdu was promised to them, as they were allowed inside to loot its wealth as payment for fighting for Liu Bei. Next, Liu Bei had to integrate Liu Zhang's court officials, which largely represented those powerful gentry clans within the Yi province. So on the suggestion of most of his advisors, Liu Bei would end up taking Wu Yi's sister as wife. Now, Wu Yi had surrendered to Liu Bei after their battle at Pei, but interestingly enough, his sister at this point was already a widow to Liu Zhang's older brother, Liu Mao. At first, Liu Bei resisted this marriage because he felt that he was related to Liu Mao. But Fa Zheng argued back that in the spring-autumn period, there is historical precedence of a Jin lord marrying his own cousin's wife to secure power. So Liu Bei marrying the widow of a much more distant relative would not be seen as an issue for anyone. And aside from the benefit of securing a marriage with a gentry clan within the Yi province, Lady Wu was also an ideal pick, because when Liu Yan had first arrived in the Yi province all those years back with aspirations to one day become an emperor, a fortune teller had told him that Lady Wu was destined to one day become an empress. So Liu Yan had his son, Liu Mao, who he had brought with him into the Yi province, and is the son who he is grooming to be his heir, marry her, hoping that would mean that his son would one day become the emperor. But Liu Mao would die young. However, now with Liu Bei marrying her, the fortune teller would still be proven right. And for those of you who are wondering about Lady Sun, she had already left Liu Bei and sailed back to Wu not long after Liu Bei left for his campaign in the Yi province, which essentially voided their unhappy marriage to each other. Then, to pacify the rest of Liu Zhang's court, Liu Bei relied mainly on those who had surrendered to him, with people like Fa Zheng, Wu Yi, and Li Yan being elevated to high posts. But at the same time, renowned scholars like Liu Ba, who had been avoiding Liu Bei since he had lived in the Jin province, now finally agreed to work for him, as he would become instrumental in fixing the economy of the Yi province when he suggested issuing new coinage in order to stabilize market prices and unify the exchange rate within the Yi province, following the scarcity caused by the 3 years of war between Liu Zhang and Liu Bei. Land reform was also considered by some, arguing to redistribute the land near Chengdu as a reward to Liu Bei's officers. But Zhao Yun spoke up against it, arguing that the people of the Yi province will eventually become the foundation of their taxation and the bodies for their armies through conscription. So it would be in everyone's best interest to allow them to keep their land, and thus Liu Bei reaffirmed the people of the Yi province by promising to not take away anyone's land. Now, there are still a few cases of abuse of power in the aftermath of Liu Bei's takeover, mainly from one man, as Fa Zheng, while talented, was also extremely vindictive, as he not only went out of his way to reward those who had helped him during his migrant days, but also went to extreme measures to punish those who had even wronged him in the slightest way. It got so bad, as Fa Zheng was just out there killing people, that many came to Zhuge Liang, begging him to rein Fa Zheng in. But knowing exactly how popular and important Fa Zheng was to Liu Bei at this moment, Zhuge Liang ignored these requests, knowing that his pleas would just have fallen on deaf ear. But at the same time, under the combined efforts of Zhuge Liang, Liu Ba, Yi Ji, Fa Zheng, and Li Yan, the five of them would go on and codify the laws for the Yi province in a book called Shu Ke, which was written to establish the foundations of the way of law and set up the future of the kingdom of Shu Han. And this is especially important as the Shu lands have always been isolated, so local customs often trumped even Han law. But with the establishment of Shu Ke and the subsequent rule of the Shu Han regime, the land of Shu would end up being closer integrated with the rest of the land. And with that, our Taming of the Shu series comes to an end, and starting next week, we'll rewind back to the start of Ma Chao's rebellion, as there's going to be plenty of crossovers between these two series, as we saw Ma Chao's importance in finally convincing Liu Zhang to surrender. Well, it's also interesting at the same time to note that Cao Cao's decision to send Zhong Yao and Xia Houyuan to attack Zhang Lu in the Hanzhong region had sparked both Liu Zhang's invitation to Liu Bei, as well as Ma Chao's rebellion in the west. So next time in our new series, we'll turn back to this trigger event and explore how it all played out for Ma Chao before arriving back to this same concluding point as Ma Chao would work under Liu Bei. Now hopefully you all enjoy this series, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!